Chapter 27, Part 1 of the Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Patrick Wu. The Memoirs of Jacques Casanova, Volume 2, Paris in Prison, by Giacomo Casanova. Translated by Arthur Machen. Episode 10, Under the Leads. Chapter 27, Part 1. To make the reader understand how I managed to escape from a place like the Leads, I must explain the nature of the locality. The Leads, used for the confinement of state prisoners, are in fact the lofts of the ducal palace, and take their name from the large plates of lead with which the roof is covered. One can only reach them through the gates of the palace, the prison buildings, or by the bridge of which I have spoken, called the Bridge of Sighs. It is impossible to reach the cells without passing through the hall where the state inquisitors hold their meetings, and their secretary has the sole charge of the key, which he only gives to the jailer for a short time in the early morning whilst he is attending to the prisoners. This is done at daybreak, because otherwise the guards, as they came and went, would be in the way of those who have to do with the Council of Ten, as the council meets every day in a hall called the Bussola, which the guards have to cross every time they go to the Leads. The prisons are under the roof on two sides of the palace, 3 to the west, mine being among the number, and 4 to the east. On the west, the roof looks into the court of the palace, and on the east, straight on to the canal called Rio di Palazzo. On this side, the cells are well lighted, and one can stand up straight, which is not the case in the prison where I was, which was distinguished by the name of Trave, on account of the enormous beam which deprived me of light. The floor of my cell was directly over the ceiling of the Inquisitors' Hall, where they commonly met only at night after the sitting of the Council of Ten, of which the whole 3 are members. As I knew my ground and the habits of the Inquisitors perfectly well, the only way to escape, the only way at least which I deemed likely to succeed, was to make a hole in the floor of my cell. But to do this, tools must be obtained, a difficult task in a place where all communication with the outside world was forbidden, where neither letters nor visitors were allowed. To bribe a guard, a good deal of money would be necessary, and I had none. And supposing that the jailer and his 2 guards allowed themselves to be strangled, for my hands were my only weapons, there was always a 3rd guard on duty at the door of the passage, which he locked and would not open till his fellow, who wished to pass through, gave him the password. In spite of all these difficulties, my only thought was how to escape, and as Boethius gave me no hints on this point, I read him no more, and as I was certain that the difficulty was only to be solved by stress of thinking, I centred all my thoughts on this one object. It has always been my opinion that when a man sets himself determinedly to do something, and thinks of naught but his design, he must succeed despite all difficulties in his path. Such an one may make himself Pope or Grand Vizier, he may overturn an ancient line of kings, provided that he knows how to seize on his opportunity and be a man of wit and pertinacity. To succeed, one must count on being fortunate and despise all ill success, but it is a most difficult operation. Towards the middle of November, Lawrence told me that Messer Grande had a prisoner in his hands whom the new secretary, Businello, had ordered to be placed in the worst cell, and who consequently was going to share mine. He told me that on the secretary's reminding him that I looked upon it as a favour to be left alone, he answered that I had grown wiser in the 4 months of my imprisonment. I was not sorry to hear the news, or that there was a new secretary. This Messer Pierre Businello was a worthy man whom I knew at Paris. He afterwards went to London as ambassador of the Republic. In the afternoon I heard the noise of the bolts, and presently Lawrence and 2 guards entered, leading in a young man who was weeping bitterly, and after taking off his handcuffs they shut him up with me, and went out without saying a word. I was lying on my bed, and he could not see me. I was amused at his astonishment. Being, fortunately for himself, 7 or 8 inches shorter than I, he was able to stand upright, and he began to inspect my armchair, which he doubtless thought was meant for his own use. Glancing at the ledge above the grating he saw Boethius, took it up, opened it, and put it down with a kind of passion, probably because, being in Latin, it was of no use to him. Continuing his inspection of the cell, he went to the left, and groping about was much surprised to find clothes. He approached the recess, and stretching out his hand he touched me, and immediately begged my pardon in a respectful manner. I asked him to sit down, and we were friends. "Who are you?" said I. "I am Maggiorin of Vicenza." My father, who was a coachman, kept me at school till I was 11, by which time I had learnt to read and write. I was afterwards apprenticed to a barber, where I learnt my business thoroughly. After that I became valet to the Count of X. I had been in the service of the nobleman for 2 years when his daughter came from the convent. It was my duty to do her hair, and by degrees I fell in love with her, and inspired her with a reciprocal passion. After having sworn 1,000 times to exist only for one another, we gave ourselves up to the task of showing each other marks of our affection, the result of which was the state of the young Countess discovered all. An old and devoted servant was the first to find out our connection and the condition of my mistress, and she told her that she felt in duty bound to tell her father, but my sweetheart succeeded in making her promise to be silent, saying that in the course of the week she herself would tell him through her confessor. She informed me of all this, and instead of going to confession we prepared for flight. She had laid hands on a good sum of money and some diamonds which had belonged to her mother, and we were to set out for Milan to-night. But to-day the Count called me after dinner, and giving me a letter, he told me to start at once and to deliver it with my own hand to the person to whom it was addressed at Venice. He spoke to me so kindly and quietly that I had not the slightest suspicion of the fate in store for me. I went to get my cloak, said good-bye to my little wife, telling her that I should soon return. Seeing deeper below the surface than I, and perchance having a presentiment of my misfortune, she was sick at heart. I came here in hot haste, and took care to deliver the fatal letter. They made me wait for an answer, and in the meantime I went to an inn, but as I came out I was arrested and put in the guard-room, where I was kept till they brought me here. I suppose, sir, I might consider the young Countess as my wife?" "You make a mistake." "But nature, when a man listens to her and nothing else, takes him from one folly to another, till she puts him under the Leads." "I am under the Leads, then, am I?" "As I am." The poor young man shed some bitter tears. He was a well-made lad, open, honest, and amorous beyond words. I secretly pardoned the Countess, and condemned the court for exposing his daughter to such temptation. A shepherd who shuts up the wolf in the fold should not complain if his flock be devoured. In all his tears and lamentations he thought not of himself but always of his sweetheart. He thought that the jailer would return and bring him some food and a bed, but I undeceived him, and offered him a share of what I had. His heart, however, was too full for him to eat. In the evening I gave him my mattress, on which he passed the night, for though he looked neat and clean enough, I did not care to have him to sleep with me, dreading the result of a lover's dreams. He neither understood how wrongly he had acted, nor how the court was constrained to punish him publicly as a cloak to the honour of his daughter and his house. The next day he was given a mattress and a dinner to the value of 15 sous, which the tribunal had assigned to him, either as a favour or a charity, for the word justice would not be appropriate in speaking of this terrible body. I told the jailer that my dinner would suffice for the two of us, and that he could employ the young man's allowance in saying masses in his usual manner. He agreed willingly, and having told him that he was lucky to be in my company, he said that we could walk in the garret for half an hour. I found this walk an excellent thing for my health and my plan of escape, which, however, I could not carry out for 11 months afterwards. At the end of this resort of rats I saw a number of old pieces of furniture thrown on the ground to the right and left of 2 great chests, and in front of a large pile of papers sewn up into separate volumes. I helped myself to a dozen of them for the sake of reading, and I found them to be accounts of trials, and very diverting, for I was allowed to read these papers, which at once contained such secrets. I found some curious replies to the judge's questions respecting the seduction of maidens, gallantries carried a little too far by persons employed in girls' schools, facts relating to confessors who had abused their penitents, schoolmasters convicted of pederasty with their pupils, and guardians who had seduced their wards. Some of the papers, dating 2 or 3 centuries back, in which the style and manners illustrated, gave me considerable entertainment. Among the pieces of furniture on the floor I saw a warming pan, a kettle, a fire shovel, a pair of tongs, some old candlesticks, some earthenware pots, and even a syringe. From this I concluded that some prisoner of distinction had been allowed to make use of these articles. But what interested me most was a straight iron bar as thick as my thumb, and about 1.5 feet long. However, I left everything as it was, as my plans had not been sufficiently ripened by time for me to appropriate any object in particular. One day, towards the end of the month, my companion was taken away, and Lawrence told me that he had been condemned to the prisoners known as the Fours, which are within the same walls as the ordinary prisons, but belong to the State Inquisitors. Those confined in them have the privilege of being able to call the jailer when they like. The prisons are gloomy, but there is an oil lamp in the midst which gives the necessary light, and there is no fear of fire, as everything is made of marble. I heard a long time after that the unfortunate Maggiorin was there for 5 years, and was afterwards sent to Cerigo for 10. I do not know whether he ever came from there. He had kept me good company, and this I discovered as soon as he was gone, for in a few days I became as melancholy as before. Fortunately, I was still allowed my walk in the garret, and I began to examine its contents with more minuteness. One of the chests was full of fine papers, pieces of cardboard, uncut pens, and clews of pack thread. The other was fastened down. A piece of polished black marble, an inch thick, 6 inches long, and 3 broad, attracted my attention, and I possessed myself of it without knowing what I was going to do with it, and I secreted it in my cell, covering it up with my shirts. A week after Maggiorin had gone, Lawrence told me that in all probability I should soon get another companion. This fellow Lawrence, who at bottom was a mere gabbling fool, began to get uneasy at my never asking him any questions. This fondness for gossip was not altogether appropriate to his office, but where is one to find beings absolutely vile? There are such persons, but happily they are few and far between, and are not to be sought for in the lower orders. Thus my jailer found himself unable to hold his tongue, and thought that the reason I asked no questions must be that I thought him incapable of answering them, and feeling hurt at this, and wishing to prove to me that I made a mistake, he began to gossip without being solicited. "I believe you will often have visitors," said he, "as the other 6 cells have each 2 prisoners who are not likely to be sent to the fours." I made him no reply, but he went on, in a few seconds. "They send to the fours all sorts of people after they have been sentenced, though they know nothing of that. The prisoners whom I have charge of under the Leads are like yourself, persons of note, and are only guilty of deeds which the inquisitive must know nothing. If you knew, sir, what sort of people shared your fate, you would be astonished. It's true that you are called a man of parts, but you will pardon me. You know that all men of parts are treated well here. You take me, I see. 50 sous a day, that's something. They give 3 livres to a citizen, 4 to a gentleman, and 8 to a foreign court. I ought to know, I think, as everything goes through my hands." He then commenced to sing his own praises, which consisted of negative clauses. "I'm no thief, nor traitor, nor greedy, nor malicious, nor brutal, as all my predecessors were, and when I have drunk a pint over and above I'm all the better for it. If my father had sent me to school I should have learnt to read and write, and I might be Messer Grande to-day, but that's not my fault. Messer Andre Diedo has a high opinion of me. My wife, who cooks for you every day, and is only 24, goes to see him when she will, and he will have her come in without ceremony, even if he be in bed, and that's more than he'll do for a senator. I promise you, you will be always having the newcomers in your cell, but never for any length of time, for as soon as the secretary has got what he wants to know from them, he sends them to their place, to the fours, to some fort, or to the Levant, and if they be foreigners they are sent across the frontier, for our government does not hold itself master of the subjects of other princes, if they be not in his service. The clemency of the court is beyond compare. There's not another in the world that treats its prisoners so well. They say it's cruel to disallow riding and visitors, but that's foolish, for what are riding in company but waste of time? You will tell me that you have nothing to do, but we can't say as much." Such was, almost word for word, the first harangue with which the fellow honoured me, and I must say I found it amusing. I saw that if the man had been less of a fool he would most certainly have been more of a scoundrel. The next day brought me a new messmate, who was treated as Maggiorin had been, and I thus found it necessary to buy another ivory spoon, for as the newcomers were given nothing on the first day of their imprisonment, I had to do all the honours of the cell. My new mate made me a low bow, for my beard, now 4 inches long, was still more imposing than my figure. Lawrence often lent me scissors to cut my nails, but he was forbidden, under pain of very heavy punishment, to let me touch my beard. I knew not the reason of this order, but I ended by becoming used to my beard as one gets used to everything. The newcomer was a man of about 50, approaching my size, a little bent, thin, with a large mouth and very bad teeth. He had small grey eyes hidden under thick eyebrows of a red colour, which made him look like an owl, and this picture was set off by a small black wig, which exhaled the disagreeable odour of oil, and by a dress of coarse grey cloth. He accepted my offer of dinner, but was reserved, and said not a word the whole day, and I was also silent, thinking he would soon recover the use of his tongue, as he did the next day. Early in the morning he was given a bed and bag of full linen. The jailer asked him, as he had asked me, what he would have for dinner, and for money to pay for it. "I have no money." "What! A moneyed man like you have no money?" "I haven't a sou." "Very good. In that case I will get you some army biscuit and water, according to instructions." He went out and returned directly afterwards with 1.5 pounds of biscuit and a pitcher, which he set before the prisoner, and then went away. Left alone with this phantom I heard a sigh, and my pity made me break the silence. "Don't sigh, sir, you shall share my dinner. But I think you have made a great mistake in coming here without money." "I have some, but it does not do to let those harpies know of it." "And so you condemn yourself to bread and water? Truly a wise proceeding. Do you know the reason of your imprisonment?" "Yes, sir. I will endeavour in a few words to inform you of it. My name is Squaldo Nobili. My father was a countryman who had me taught reading and writing, and at his death left me his cottage and the small patch of ground belonging to it. I lived in Friuli, about a day's journey from the marshes of Udine. As a torrent called Corno often damaged my little property, I determined to sell it and to set up in Venice, which I did 10 years ago. I brought with me 8,000 livres in fair sequins, and knowing that in this happy commonwealth all men enjoy the blessings of liberty, I believed that by utilizing my capital I might make a little income, and I began to lend money on security. Relying on my thrift, my judgment, and my knowledge of the world, I chose this business in preference to all others. I rented a small house in the neighbourhood of the Royal Canal, and having finished it I lived there in comfort by myself, and in the course of 2 years I found I had made a profit of 10,000 livres, though I had expended 2,000 on household expenses, as I wished to live in comfort. In this fashion I saw myself in a fair way of making a respectable fortune in time. But one day, having lent a Jew 2 sequins upon some books, I found one amongst them called La Sagesse by Charon. It was then I found out how good a thing it is to be able to read, for this book, which you, sir, may not have read, contains all that a man need know, purging him of all the prejudices of his childhood. With Charon goodbye to hell and all the empty terrors of a future life. One's eyes are opened, one knows the way to bliss, one becomes wise indeed. Do you, sir, get this book, and pay no heed to those foolish persons who would tell you this treasure is not to be apprehended." This curious discourse made me know my man. As to Charon, I read the book, though I did not know it had been translated into Italian. The author, who was a great admirer of Montaigne, thought to surpass his model, but toiled in vain. He is not much read despite the prohibition to read his works, which should have given them some popularity. He had the impudence to give his book the title of one of Solomon's treatises, a circumstance which does not say much for his modesty. My companion went on as follows. Set free by Charon from any scruples I still might have, and from those false ideas so hard to rid oneself of, I pushed my business in such sort, that at the end of 6 years I could lay my hand on 10,000 sequins. There is no need for you to be astonished at this, as in this wealthy city gambling, debauchery, and idleness set all the world awry and in continual need of money. So do the wise gather what the fool drops. 3 years ago a certain Count Seriman came and asked me to take from him 500 sequins, to put them in my business, and to give him half profits. All he asked was for an obligation in which I promised to return him the whole sum on demand. At the end of a year I sent him 75 sequins, which made 15% on his money. He gave me a receipt for it, but was ill pleased. He was wrong, for I was in no need of money, and had not used his for business purposes. At the end of the 2nd year, out of pure generosity, I sent him the same amount, but we came to a quarrel, and he demanded the return of the 500 sequins. Certainly, I said, but I must deduct the 150 you have already received. Enraged at this, he served me with a writ for the payment of the whole sum. A clever lawyer undertook my defence, and was able to gain me 2 years. 3 months ago I was spoken to as to an agreement, and I refused to hear of it, but fearing violence I went to the Abbé Giustiniani, the Spanish ambassador's secretary, and for a small sum he let me a house on the precincts of the embassy, where one is safe from surprises. I was quite willing to let Count Seriman have his money, but I claimed a reduction of 100 sequins on account of the costs of the lawsuit. A week ago the lawyers on both sides came to me. I showed them a purse of 250 sequins, and told them they might take it, but not a penny more. They went away without saying a word, both wearing an ill-pleased air, of which I took no notice. 3 days ago the Abbé Giustiniani told me that the ambassador had thought fit to give permission to the state inquisitors to send their men at once to my house to make search therein. I thought the thing impossible under the shelter of a foreign ambassador, and instead of taking the usual precautions, I waited the approach of the men-at-arms, only putting my money in a place of safety. At daybreak Messer Grande came to the house, and asked me for 350 sequins, and on my telling him that I hadn't a farthing he seized me, and here I am. I shuddered, less at having such an infamous companion than at his evidently considering me as his equal, for if he had thought of me in any other light he would certainly not have told me this long tale, doubtless in the belief that I should take his part. In all the folly about Charon with which he tormented me in the 3 days we were together, I found by bitter experience the truth of the Italian proverb, Guardati da colui che non ha letto che un libro solo. By reading the work of the misguided priest he had become an atheist, and of this he made his boast all the day long. In the afternoon Lawrence came to tell me to come and speak with the secretary. He dressed himself hastily, and instead of his own shoes he took mine without my seeing him. He came back in half an hour in tears, and took out of his shoes 2 purses containing 350 sequins, and, the jailer going before, he went to take them to the secretary. A few moments afterwards he returned, and taking his cloak, went away. Lawrence told me that he had been set at liberty. I thought, and with good reason, that to make him acknowledge his debt and pay it, the secretary had threatened him with torture, and if it were only used in similar cases I, who detest the principle of torture, would be the first to proclaim its utility. On New Year's Day, 1733, I received my presents. Lawrence brought me a dressing gown lined with foxskin, a coverlet of wadded silk, and a bearskin bag for me to put my legs in, which I welcomed gladly, for the coldness was unbearable as the heat in August. Lawrence told me that I might spend to the amount of 6 sequins a month, that I might have what books I liked, and take in the newspaper, and that this present came from Messer de Bragadin. I asked him for a pencil, and I wrote upon a scrap of paper, "I am grateful for the kindness of the tribunal and the goodness of Messer de Bragadin." The man who would know what were my feelings at all this must have been in a similar situation to my own. In the first gush of feeling I forgave my oppressors, and was on the point of giving up the idea of escape. So easily shall you move a man that you have brought low and overwhelmed with misfortune. Lawrence told me that Messer de Bragadin had come before the 3 inquisitors, and that on his knees, and with tears in his eyes, he had entreated them to let him give me this mark of his affection if I were still in the land of the living. The inquisitors were moved, and were not able to refuse his request. I wrote down without delay the names of the books I wanted. One fine morning, as I was walking in the garret, my eyes fell on the iron bar I have mentioned, and I saw that it might very easily be made into a defensive or offensive weapon. I took possession of it, and having hidden it under my dressing gown, I conveyed it into my cell. As soon as I was alone, I took the piece of black marble, and I found that I had to my hand an excellent whetstone, for by rubbing the bar with the stone I obtained a very good edge. My interest roused in this work in which I was but an apprentice, and in the fashion of which I seemed likely to become possessed of an instrument totally prohibited under the Leads, impelled, perhaps, also by my vanity to make a weapon without any of the necessary tools, and incited by my very difficulties, for I worked away till dark without anything to hold my whetstone except my left hand, and without a drop of oil to soften the iron. I made up my mind to persevere in my difficult task. My saliva served me in the stead of oil, and I toiled 8 days to produce 8 edges terminating in a sharp point, the edges being 1.5 inches in length. My bar, thus sharpened, formed an 8-sided dagger, and would have done justice to a first-rate cutler. No one can imagine the toil and trouble I had to bear, nor the patience required to finish this difficult task without any other tools than a loose piece of stone. I put myself, in fact, to a kind of torture unknown to the tyrants of all ages. My right arm had become so stiff that I could hardly move it. The palm of my hand was covered with a large scar, the result of the numerous blisters caused by the hardness and the length of the work. No one would guess the sufferings I underwent to bring my work to completion. Proud of what I had done, without thinking what use I could make of my weapon, my first care was to hide it in such a manner as would defy a minute search. After thinking over 1,000 plans, to all of which there was some objection, I cast my eyes on my armchair, and there I contrived to hide it so as to be secure from all suspicion. Thus did Providence aid me to contrive a wonderful and almost inconceivable plan of escape. I confess to a feeling of vanity, not because I eventually succeeded, for I owed something to good luck, but because I was brave enough to undertake such a scheme in spite of the difficulties which might have ruined my plans and prevented my ever attaining liberty. After thinking for 3 or 4 days as to what I should do with the bar I had made into an edged tool, as thick as a walking stick and 20 inches long, I determined that the best plan would be to make a hole in the floor under my bed. I was sure that the room below my cell was no other than the one in which I had seen Messer Cavalli. I knew that this room was opened every morning, and I felt persuaded that, after I had made my hole, I could easily let myself down with my sheets, which I would make into a rope and fasten to my bed. Once there, I would hide under the table of the court, and in the morning, when the door was open, I could escape and get to a place of safety before anyone could follow me. I thought it possible that a sentry might be placed in the hall, but my short pike ought to soon rid me of him. The floor might be of a double or even of triple thickness, and this thought puzzled me, for in that case how was I to prevent the guard sweeping out the room throughout the 2 months my work might last? If I forbade them to do so, I might rouse suspicion. All the more as, to free myself of the fleas, I had requested them to sweep out the cell every day, and in sweeping they would soon discover what I was about. I might find some way out of this difficulty. I began by forbidding them to sweep, without giving any reason. A week after, Lawrence asked me why I did so. I told him because of the dust which might make me cough violently and give me some fatal injury. "I will make them water the floor," said he. "That would be worse, Lawrence, for the damp might cause a plethora." In this manner I obtained a week's respite, but at the end of that time the lout gave orders that my cell should be swept. He had the bed carried out into the garret, and on pretence of having the sweeping done with greater care, he lighted a candle. This let me know that the rascal was suspicious of something, but I was crafty enough to take no notice of him, and so far from giving up my plea, I only thought how I could put it on good train. Next morning I pricked my finger and covered my handkerchief with the blood, and then awaited Lawrence in bed. As soon as he came I told him that I had coughed so violently as to break a blood vessel, which had made me bring up all the blood he saw. "Get me a doctor." The doctor came, ordered me to be bled, and wrote me a prescription. I told him it was Lawrence's fault, as he had persisted in having the room swept. The doctor blamed him for doing so, and just as if I had asked him he told us of a young man who had died from the same cause, and said that there was nothing more dangerous than breathing in dust. Lawrence called all the gods to witness that he had only had the room swept for my sake, and promised it should not happen again. I laughed to myself, for the doctor could not have played his part better if I had given the word. The guards who were there were delighted, and said they would take care only to sweep the cells of those prisoners who had angered them. When the doctor was gone, Lawrence begged my pardon, and assured me that all the other prisoners were in good health, although their cells were swept out regularly. "But what the doctor says is worth considering," said he, "and I shall tell them all about it, for I look upon them as my children." The blood-letting did me good, as it made me sleep, and relieved me of the spasms with which I was sometimes troubled. I had regained my appetite and was getting back my strength every day, but the time to set about my work was not yet come. It was still too cold, and I could not hold the bar for any length of time without my hand becoming stiff. My scheme required much thought. I had to exercise boldness and foresight to rid myself of troubles which chance might bring to pass or which I could foresee. The situation of a man who had to act as I had is an unhappy one, but in risking all for all half its bitterness vanishes. The long nights of winter distressed me, for I had to pass 19 mortal hours in darkness, and on the cloudy days, which are common enough at Venice, the light I had was not sufficient for me to be able to read. Without any distractions I fell back on the idea of my escape, and a man who always thinks on one subject is in danger of becoming a monomaniac. A wretched kitchen lamp would have made me happy, but how am I to get such a thing? O blessed prerogative of thought, how happy was I when I thought I had found a way to possess myself of such a treasure! To make such a lamp I required a vase, wicks, oil, a flint and steel, tinder, and matches. A porringer would do for the vase, and I had one which was used for cooking eggs and butter. Pretending that the common oil did not agree with me, I got them to buy me Lucca oil for my salad, and my cotton counterpane would finish me with wicks. I then said I had the toothache, and asked Lawrence to give me a pumice stone, but as he did not know what I meant, I told him that a musket flint would do as well if it were soaked in vinegar for a day, and then being applied to the tooth the pain would be eased. Lawrence told me that the vinegar I had was excellent, and that I could soak the stone myself, and he gave me 3 or 4 flints he had in his pocket. All I had to do was get some sulphur and tinder, and the procuring of these two articles set all my wits to work. At last fortune came to my assistance. End of chapter 27, part 1. Recording by Patrick Wu, Orange, California.